Hey guys, and welcome to a new video. In this video I'm going to be comparing dual wield and two-handed weapons for all combat styles. So when you're ready, grab your cup of tea, sit back, relax and enjoy. To keep things simple, I will be comparing all tier 90 weapons in this video, as weapons of an equal tier should be doing the same damage overall. To start things off, I'll first talk about the price difference between the tier 90 weapons in Runescape. A set of tier 90 Ascension crossbows will set you back 158 mil, while a Noxious longbow will only set you back 128 mil. A set of Drygores, regardless of type, usually sets you back at least 30 mil. A Noxious scythe sets you back 150 mil. A Seismic Wand and Singularity will set you back a whopping 210 mil. A Noxious Staff, however, will set you back 130 mil. As you guys can see, ranged and magic dual wield is far more expensive than buying a two-handed weapon instead. Now you may be wondering why one style is more expensive than the other, and it's really simple and it comes down to two different reasons. One is that some weapons are dropped by higher tier bosses, not easily accessible to newer or mid-level players. For example, the Seismic Wand and Singularity are dropped by Virago. And sometimes dual wield is so much more versatile or better that's the more popular combat style, and therefore there's more demand for those weapons and the price is higher. A quick example of how the market works is, let's say Ascensions are nerfed. They then start dropping in price because so many people start panic selling them because they are not as useful as they were before. The demand is much lower and therefore the price drops. Before we get into the pros and cons of, let's say, using a two-handed weapon over dual wielding, let's quickly talk about damage. Now, the damage between all of these weapons should be equal. Ignoring extra factors like the criminal bolts and stuff, weapons of an equal tier should be doing the same amount of damage. The example on screen shows me using Dragonfire with a Noxious Staff and with a Seismic Wand and Singularity. As you guys can see, the damage is pretty much the same except for 5 damage for some weird reason, but it should be the same, and therefore all of your ability damage should be equal, especially with magic. Keep in mind that the dummy I'm attacking on screen is using my max hit with the gear and boosts I'm using. The hits will of course be different every time you hit a mob or boss because of RNG. The difference between dual wield and two-handed weapons comes into play with weapon speed, versatility, and two abilities that are different for ranged and magic. I'll be going over each style separately, starting off with magic. The difference in abilities for dual wield magic and two-handed magic isn't really that big. The only ability you want to be using in your rotation for dual wield that's different to two-handed weapons is Concentrated Blast, which is a ability you want to cancel out. For two-handed magic, this ability would be Sonic Wave instead. Sonic Wave and Concentrated Blast, when cancelled out straight away after the first 2 hits, do the exact same amount of active spell damage, being 157%. The difference between these two spells is with Sonic Wave, your next attack has a 6% bonus on accuracy, and with Concentrated Blast, your next attack has a 10% extra chance to critical hit. So in situations where you have 100% accuracy, Concentrated Blast will always be better. If you do not have 100% accuracy, let's say Rise of the 6, a Noxious Staff using Sonic Wave would be better in that situation. The next thing we should compare is attack speed between the fastest Seismic Wand and Singularity and the Noxious Staff being just average. This also matters for forward ticking, which is something I don't do and do not want to cover. However, a faster attack speed can be very beneficial if you want to vuln. Invulnerability is a spell that gives you 10% more damage for an entire minute on your target. Casting Invulnerability using a Seismic Wand and Singularity took me around 2 seconds when I timed it using a stopwatch from when I first pressed my Invulnerability keybind on my keyboard. The Noxious Staff took 4 seconds to cast the spell. I'll show it to you in normal speed so you can really see the difference. And for some reason in PvM situations, I don't know why, using a Noxious Staff and trying to use invulnerability sometimes goes wrong and it takes even longer than 4 seconds or gets cancelled out completely. I don't know why this is the case, but it is sometimes for me. It might have something to do with dead clicks, I really don't know. The final big reason why Dual Wield is actually better than Magic Two-Hander in high level PvM situations, with some exceptions, is because of the versatility when using a magic shield. Because with Dual Wield you can keep attacking using your main hand or Volning when using your shield, and if you're using a two-handed weapon and you equip your shield, your two-handed weapon will be de-equipped. I found this to be especially useful when doing solo bossing like Telos or with Elite Dungeon solos, and therefore I personally find Seismics to be the better option for Magic. However, let's now go to an overview of the pros and cons of two-handed and dual-wield magic weapons, because there's much more to it than just Volning, shield switching, and the abilities that give you accuracy or critical hit chance. So for dual wield magic, you get more damage with your abilities if you cancel out your concentrated blast compared to better accuracy using Sonic Wave with two-handed magic. You can of course switch it up using both dual wield and two-handed magic weapons, but let's not go there in this video. Now, dual wield magic usually looks better in my personal opinion, but that really isn't a point that should matter, as you can use cosmetic overrides. Volning is generally easier with dual wield magic, at least in my personal opinion, and it's more versatile for shield and one-handed invention switches like a planted feet switch on your orb. Dual wield magic, in the case of tier 90 weapons, is more expensive and less versatile with two-handed switches like a augmented sun spear with a planted feet switch instead of an orb, but that's why you use an orb anyways. Dual wield magic is also a lot more effort, which is why if you're a beginner to high level PvM, I recommend using Revolution and a two-handed magic weapon instead, in this case a Noxious Staff, as it's so much easier. It's also easier to use for Slayer, AFKing and hit and running. If you're running from boss and spamming abilities, I find the Noxious Staff to be much better for this. It is also cheaper. The Noxious Staff, however, does have way higher auto attack damage, and by auto attack I mean when you do cast your spell from your staff, not even talking about 4-ticking here, you do almost double the damage of a Seismic Wand and Singularity. That's because of the weapon speed and the amount of ticks between spells or auto attacks. It just does more damage, but the base ability damage is the same. And the big con of a two-handed magic weapon is of course it being less versatile with one-handed switches like a shield. So it really comes down to personal preference. Let's be honest here, there isn't a massive difference between dual-wield magic and two-handed magic, but if you're going for high-level PvM and you want to fill certain roles, tanking roles even, dual-wield magic is just so much easier with shield switching and shield camping that I would recommend Seismics over a Noxious Staff. Let's move on to ranged. To compare dual-wield ranged and two-handed ranged, let's first cover the basic abilities you should be using in your rotation if you're using dual-wield, which is Needle Strike, or Dazing Shot if you're using a two-handed bow, in this case being Ascensions and a Noxious Longbow. Now Needle Strike does the same amount of damage as Dazing Shot. The difference between these two abilities is a accuracy decrease with Dazing Shot on your target on their next attack, and with Needle Strike you get a flat 7% increase to your damage dealt on your next attack. So Needle Strike is the better ability in almost every single situation. If you buy the Salt the Wound and Greater Dazing Shot from the Shattered Worlds minigame reward shop costing 63 million anima, you get an extra 2 abilities. You get Salt the Wound for both dual wield and two-handed ranged weapons, and Greater Dazing Shot for two-handed ranged weapons. The great thing about these abilities is with Greater Dazing Shot you apply a puncture. That puncture can be stacked up by multiple people or alone as long as you hit the enemy or the target that has the puncture stack on him within 9 seconds. Now the Salt the Wound ability does 188% weapon damage plus an additional 18% weapon damage for every puncture stack on the enemy. This means that you can do a huge amount of damage using Salt the Wound on an enemy with a maximum amount of stacks. The maximum amount of stacks is 10, and the puncture ability also applies a bleeding damage effect. So these two abilities in combination with each other and coordination can be very powerful at group bosses where you use ranged. Let's quickly go over the pros and cons of dual wield and two-handed ranged in an overview, shall we? Now, ranged dual wield is generally with Ascensions, if we're comparing Ascensions and a Noxious Longbow, better for PvM than a Noxious Longbow. Because Ascensions have the ability to shoot the criminal bolts and a Noxious Longbow does not. Two-handed crossbows, on the other hand, do have the ability to shoot the criminal bolts as well. Let's say the Eldritch crossbow, for example, but we are comparing the Noxious Longbow and Ascensions here, and at the same time dual wield ranged and two-handed ranged. Ascensions are more versatile for shield and invention switches which are one-handed, however they are more expensive and less versatile with two-handed switches like a augmented sun spear, and you have much less range with Ascensions compared to a Noxious Longbow which has the longest range in game. A Noxious Longbow, however, is much easier to use with Evolution, and it's better for Slayer, AFKing and hit and running. It's also a lot cheaper, you have the extra range, and Greater Dazing Shot is a very good ability. It's less versatile with one-handed switches like a one-handed shield, and it's also less damage with a regular Dazing Shot compared to a rotation using Needle Strike with dual wield ranged. Now let's move on to the final combat style being melee, which is rather interesting. Now with melee, I wanted to start with the pros and cons because it's a little different. Now dual wield melee obviously has higher single target DPM. Dual wield melee, in this case being Dragors, are also a lot cheaper compared to a Noxious Scythe. With dual wield melee, if you have the ability from Shattered Worlds, you also have more mobility using Bladed Dive. You also have the Greater Flurry, Barge and Fury abilities in comparison to just Greater Barge and Fury for two-handed melee weapons. Dual wield melee is again more versatile, much like dual wield ranged and magic for shield and invention switches. The only downside to dual wield melee is the lesser range. With two-handed melee, if you're using a Halberd type weapon, you of course have much more range because you can hit one tile further than you would with, let's say, dual wield weapons, which is better for Slayer and AFKing, and you also have access to more AoE abilities like Quake and Hurricane, so that becomes even better. The only downside to a Noxious Scythe is the price tag compared to a set of Drygors, which are much cheaper. The only reason I'll be mentioning using two-handed and dual wield for melee both in combination with each other is because it's really not that hard to use both if you can afford both. The reason for this is because Decimate and Cleave both are the highest damaging abilities except for Dismember, which is a bleed, and they do not share a cooldown much like Smash and Havoc, for example, which do the same damage and disable prayers in PvP, but if you use Havoc with dual wield and you switch to two-handed, you cannot use Smash. Now, Quake also is a very useful ability. You can switch to your two-handed weapon to lower the target's defense and then go back to your dual wield rotation because dual wield generally is better versus a boss for high level PvM, for example, unless you need the range at, let's say, Araxor. This is slowly turning into a DPS rotation thing, but you can do this. Let's quickly go to the conclusion of the video instead of babbling on about DPS rotations. So, to conclude the video, it doesn't necessarily matter which tier 90 weapon you go for, which style you go for, but dual wield will be more versatile for high tier PvM. If you're getting into PvM and you're using Revolution, a two-handed weapon will usually be easier to use, and you'll benefit more from it if you enjoy Slayer more with the Scythe, Noxious Staff, or the Noxious Longbow, doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, it is up to you. And with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it informative. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.